a song's only really going to be as strong as its weakest link. And sometimes if the editing and the punching and stuff, it's never going to really start to sew together and feel like a cohesive song that someone could stay in. And they won't really know why, but sometimes it can be because of that subtle fluctuation that's just not consistent. And it's also going to be hell when they give it to a mix engineer and he's just like, great, I can't get a static balance, but if you have tracks that are recorded really well, you should be able to set a decent static mix level pretty quickly, depending on the song, and know that it just works. Huh, what's this red button do?
You are now entering a restricted area. You may experience a phenomenon known as TrueLevelStudio. Let's rock.
All right, welcome back to the record process. And today, Mr. Tom Conran, Mr. Adam Ackerman,
that's us,
Hi.
and myself are going to pick up where we left off halfway through the tracking portion of making a record. And today we're going to talk about the wonderful world of punches and overdubs, what to do after you've tracked it and you realize, hey, could this be better?
That was a punch sound.
Right. That's good.
We should get that in post.
Yeah. We might have to hit you with some love in post on that one.
Maybe we'll have to overdub it. Dare I say?
Was it intentional? Maybe.
Who knows?
We're definitely going to act like it sure as shit was now. But that brings us to our the point of this episode, which is, in fact, talking about how to use overdubs and punches to your advantage, what that means, how to kind of go about it and treat it as best as possible, and how to use it to the full advantage. So, Tom, why don't you start us off, as you're clearly on fire this week, by walking us through the world of what overdubs, punches, and doubles, and what the difference kind of is.
So, all right, let's start with punches. So we have an awesome take, and maybe we didn't get like the best performance on this one word here or there, and we like everything else, and we just wanted to make it a little bit stronger. Enter in punches.
Right.
Typically, how I like to do this is I'll start the artist a couple bars before they start matching the energy, and specifically, let's talk about vocals. And start a couple lines before they start matching their performance from before. We punch in, we punch out on the given line, and now we have a brand new take of that particular section. Where the term punch comes from is back in ye olden days of tape. You had to punch in, you had to record on one track. If you wanted to overdub, you had to record on that track, and you had to punch in on the record and then punch out on the record. I'm not sure where the term punch actually comes from, but the action of you hitting the record and getting out of the recording by hitting the record again, I feel like every time you do it, you do it with such ferocity that people were just like, nah, you punch it.
Right. I mean, you don't have the luxury now, if you're in Pro Tools or DAW, it's just like kind of like continuous recording where you can just be like, I didn't punch out at the exact right time. Mm-hmm. Cool. Then you can slide a track back and line it up with, great. That new file will end right before that next downbeat. On tape, you really had to kind of be on it. And I think that was like you let whoever's at the top of the hierarchy or really wants to, take that risk and feels bold that day to kind of do it. So yeah, that's probably where it was at, where it's like, you can't just like, you got to actually be on, you got to know that machine, you got to kind of anticipate it.
Yeah. And different machines have different punch in and punch out times too.
Right.
And so for example, on the ATR, the Ampex ATR 102, there's an actual curve that you can set on the different audio cards for the different style of punching. So if you're using it as a 2-track machine, or if it was more of a multi-track machine and you're using it to record multi-track stuff, you could do it so it's a faster punch in or a slower punch in, and punch out, punch in. But yeah, that I'm curious, maybe if someone messed up, they got punched for it.
Ooh,
yeah.
We could
Really-
bring that
really
into our
speculating
process.
here.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's punches.
Well, and also, so I'm curious, but maybe talk about a little bit too for working out of a home studio, right? Because a lot of people are now doing the engineering stuff themselves, as well as cutting the tracks and performing. So it's a lot of very punch heavy opportunities. Especially because you can set up, and something I want to really talk about, and what definitely bears exploration if you're someone that's working at home tracking your stuff and you haven't yet kind of gotten into this world. Most DAWs will offer, especially Logic. I know I know probably a good amount of our listeners and just general artists that we worked with do a lot of stuff in Logic nowadays, and you can actually set auto punch in and out parameters, and the amount of pre-roll time, which gives you that opportunity to pretty much be your own engineer ahead of time. Set it up to play 4 measures, so it gives yourself time to get into the track, get into the tempo, and start playing. So that when it does punch you in and out, it sounds natural. It doesn't sound like you're just starting right away. Which I think is a huge point to harp on when we talk about punches and doing it the most
naturally
transparent way is kind of matching that. And also we talked before about if you're punching out, so many things can change in the way you're positioned with an instrument, the way you're holding it. Say if you're talking about a vocal, if you cut the majority of a track and you're 6 inches from the mic, and then you go back to punch in and you're all
3
of a sudden
feet,
18, 24 inches from the mic, that's going to sound way different. And you're going to have to, maybe you can fix it with clip gain or, but most likely not, because that's going to have overall, like we talked about, a different sound to it. That's going to be really tough to fit naturally. You see a lot of this with whether it's acoustic guitar tracking too. If you move a little bit, the position, the directionality of the mic, the sound hole in relationship to the instrument could change if you're turning around to hit stop and then turning back around to hit record. So make sure if it's something like that you kind of have a distance measured out, whether it's something that you can easily reference with your hand, or, find something like a drumstick is always really handy for stuff like this, because you kind of know, cool, it goes to the first V on this Vic Firth stick between, the 12th fret and the microphone, the diaphragm of the microphone. Things like that where you can swing around, just pick it up and be like, cool, I'm in the same place. Really helpful. I talked about a little bit in the previous episode how even sometimes taping the positioning of your feet so that when the guitar is angled and faced the same direction, you'll know exactly where, the angle that the guitar was positioned. And also even maybe taping, making sure you're using the same pick, same thickness, same guitar, right? If you're maybe coming back to something and listening back and being like, oh, I retracked it. It's good practice also, if you have to do that, to save your settings, to get the most accurate punches, because that's really where, punching something can make or break it, where you might have actually given yourself way more work if you do a punch that's much tougher to sew. So you might have played it technically right, but maybe it might have been something that nobody would really notice, like the transition of a chord or something in a full mix. But now you've created a moment where it feels like that guitar or the low end drops out, or something happens that distracts.
Yeah,
overall.
and the one thing to say about like setting your locators, whether you being your own engineer or the engineer doing it or the engineer physically punching in and out, it's about in digital, it's about the zero crossings. So like if you have a chord that sustains throughout and you're just punching in for another one chord here and there, and you don't have that sustain from the chord previous or the sustain going into the next chord, it can create a weird a zero crossing point for that will make it stand out when it comes mixed, rather than if like the chord was a little fudged going into whereas before if it was like a little fudged, at least it was consistent
With the rest of the playing and the take. I mean, drummers know this especially from even Adam, when you're cutting drums and stuff like that, you have to maybe play a whole section if it's like a chorus or something and you're punching, halfway through it. You can't just all right, give me 2 measures before and then start. You got to get the whole kit ringing. You have to get drums ringing if there were fills before it. All that, the same exact part, the same cymbals. And how many takes do you listen back and you're like, oh, I can tell that was a bad punch because they caught the take where he hit a different cymbal or hit a cymbal twice as hard as the take before it. And it just doesn't work. So as a producer, that's when it comes into being able to know how to sew those takes together seamlessly. So the illusion is still there, and being able to listen for things like that, like ringing. And even, when we talk about committing to guitar sounds and effects and printing, down a whole chain, you have to play that whole thing, because especially if you have long tail decays on your reverbs or on your, on your delays or anything like that, that's part of the punch. So part of the punch starts way before you actually hit record and punch the sound in, and remembering and thinking about so there are times where it's a whole series of movements that we have to do where it's like, okay, taking this this pitch shifting effect off and then hitting this reverb on. But I might have to do all of that before the section that I actually want to punch and get a fresh take on, just so that the transition is seamless. And and I think it's sometimes that gets a little lost in I'll just punch in and make it new. It's like, sure, if you do it once and it's just like a rhythm guitar part that you're gonna, it's gonna be a background thing, whatever. But if you start to do this here and there and on every track that you do and aren't careful, before long, a song being the sum of every part and every audio file that you're tracking and adding to it, you're gonna start to, it's only, the song's only really going to be as strong as its weakest link. And sometimes if the editing and the punching and stuff, it's never going to really start to sew together and feel like a cohesive song that someone could stay in, and they won't really know why, but sometimes it can be because of that subtle fluctuation that's just not consistent. And it's also going to be hell when they give it to a mix engineer and he's just like, great, I can't get a static balance. But if you have tracks that are recorded really well, you should be able to set a decent static mix level, pretty quickly, depending on the song, and know that it just works.
Yeah,
but
and that's a good argument too for getting safeties and things like that, or especially
right.
I know I like to do a lot of time-based effects in the box for that reason, or even if you're doing something if you're punching a guitar part, maybe you do try your best to match the effects, but you can't quite get it right. If you're also capturing a DI and you can reamp that afterwards and send that back through the effects chain as one single audio file, that can really save you a lot of headache as an engineer or as a producer when it comes time to actually process this stuff in post, because now you're dealing with a single signal, really hard to say, going right through an amp, through your effects chain. And that way you can keep a consistency throughout it. So like we've been saying, if you can get it right the first time, that's the main thing, right? As Billy Joel once said. But if you can make some headaches for yourself if you're really heavily relying on these overdubs and punches. But I think really that kind of gets into the more artistic argument for overdubs and layering and things like that is, getting back to genre and style and like looking at what's going on in the art that you're trying to make and trying to determine what really feels good within a mix or a master or what really feels good with a track as far as double tracking. And maybe Tom, you could speak a little bit more on that, on like some of the places that